what if everything you've ever been taught about, uh, karma, the whole idea that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, what if that's actually just a massive cosmic lie?
Right. A lie designed almost entirely to protect our own pride.
Exactly. I mean, we all walk around with this expectation that the universe functions like, I don't know, a giant flawless spreadsheet.
A spreadsheet where the math always checks out perfectly.
Yeah. Like you put a certain amount of good deeds into column A and you get a very predictable amount of blessings in column B. And it feels incredibly safe to live like that.
Oh, absolutely. It creates this really powerful illusion of control. Because when we believe the universe is strictly transactional, we essentially convince ourselves that if we just, follow the formula,
Eat the right foods, say the right prayers.
right, make the right moral choices,
Yeah.
we think we're completely insulated from the random, terrifying chaos of life.
But then you step into the absolute oldest story in the biblical record, and suddenly that comforting cosmic spreadsheet it's shredded into a million pieces.
It really is. The theological and emotional landscape we're looking at today is frankly terrifying.
It is. So welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today we are exploring one of the most profound, puzzling, and hotly debated texts in human history, which is the Book of Job.
Job is a text that violently resists easy answers. It's like the absolute definition of a shattered paradigm.
So our mission today is to go far beyond that cliche, bumper sticker understanding of why bad things happen to good people.
Yeah, that barely scratches the surface.
It really doesn't. We're going to unpack this hidden cosmic wager, explore the absolute limits of human wisdom, and discover why this ancient epic is actually a surgical strike against human self-righteousness.
To really grasp the gravity of this, we have to start with the sheer age of the text.
Right, because when we say ancient, we aren't just talking about like a few thousand years ago. We are talking about an era so far back, it predates almost every structured religious system we even know about.
Exactly. I mean, while the book of Genesis is placed first in the Bible to establish the timeline of creation, the actual events of Job and the composition of its core narrative predate the writing of the rest of the Torah.
Wow.
Yeah, scholars widely consider it to be the absolute oldest biblical narrative in existence.
And the Jewish tradition, which is actually affirmed in the Talmud, attributes the authorship of the Book of Job to Moses, right?
That's the working theory, yes.
Yeah.
That Moses wrote it during his 40 years in exile in Midian.
Which is wild because if you look at a map of the ancient Near East, Midian just happens to border Job's homeland, which is the land of Uz.
The geographical and historical alignment there is just fascinating. Moses was educated in all the wisdom and literature of Egypt.
Right, he had the training.
Exactly. He possessed the staggering literary sophistication required to pen what Victor Hugo actually once called the greatest masterpiece of the human mind.
That's quite an endorsement.
It is. And during those 40 years wandering the deserts of Midian as a shepherd, Moses would have had direct access to the ancient oral accounts or maybe even early written records of Job's life and his trials.
And the internal evidence backing up this incredible antiquity it's everywhere in the text. It's hiding in plain sight once you know what to look for.
Oh, absolutely. Just take Job's wealth, for example.
Yeah, it isn't measured in gold coins or, real estate or stock portfolios. It's measured entirely in livestock. He's got, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels?
500 yoke of oxen and 500 female donkeys.
Right. And that specific metric of wealth is the hallmark of the patriarchal economy. We're looking at a setting somewhere between 2000 and 1800 BC.
Which places Job as a direct contemporary of men like Abraham or Isaac.
And to put that into perspective for you, Job is functioning as a pre-Levitical priest for his own family. He's out there building altars and offering sacrifices himself.
Which was the standard primitive practice long before the national priesthood of Israel was ever established at Mount Sinai.
And what's really wild to me is what's completely missing from the book. There is zero mention of the Mosaic Law.
Nothing.
No exodus from Egypt, no tabernacle, no covenant with the nation of Israel, no promised land.
If this book were written during or after Israel's national period, omitting all of that towering history would be completely unthinkable.
It would be like trying to write a comprehensive history of the United States government without ever once mentioning the Constitution or the Revolutionary War or even the concept of democracy.
That's a great analogy. The silence on those historical events completely proves the era of its composition.
Yeah.
And look at his lifespan, too.
Oh, yeah. The lifespan is crazy.
After his intense trials are finally over, the text explicitly notes that Job lived another 140 years.
Right, and when you add that to the years he had already lived, because we know he had lived long enough to have 10 grown children who were independently wealthy and throwing their own feasts,
You're looking at a total lifespan of around 200 years.
which directly matches the extended lifespans of the ancient patriarchs, right? Abraham lived to be 175, Isaac lived to 180.
Exactly. The biological clock of the narrative fits perfectly into that specific window of human history.
But it's not just the historical markers, is it? It's the actual granular language of the text. I was reading Chuck Missler's commentary, and he highlights the staggering linguistic genius of this book.
Oh, the vocabulary is incredible. It contains 110 words known as hapax legomena.
Wait, a hapax what?
Hapax legomena. Think about language like geological strata. A hapax legomenon is a word that appears only once in an entire body of text.
So meaning it's nowhere else in the Bible.
Nowhere else in the entire Old Testament.
Mhm.
Finding 110 of them in the book of Job is like drilling down into a linguistic core sample and discovering soil that just doesn't exist anywhere else in the region.
That is wild.
Yeah, because we see these unique words alongside these archaic Aramaic structures. Linguists can essentially carbon date the text's origins.
And the vocabulary is so incredibly specific. Like, it's deeply embedded in this wild, untamed world. The author uses, I think it was 5 different Hebrew words just for the word lion.
Right, and 6 different words for traps, 6 different words for darkness.
It shows this incredible, almost terrifying intimacy with the harsh realities of nature, mining, and animal anatomy. Plus, the divine name Shaddai, which translates to the Almighty, is used 31 times in Job.
Which is more than in the rest of the Old Testament combined.
Really?
Yes, and Shaddai is the specific name of God most intimately associated with the patriarchal era.
Oh, right. Because when God appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he specifically noted that he appeared to them as El Shaddai.
Exactly. It proves this isn't just some later Jewish writer inventing a clever backstory. It's an authentic artifact of a pre-Israelite world.
Finding the Book of Job is like digging in the desert sand and hitting an ancient time capsule. But when you pry it open, expecting to find crude stone tools or simple cave drawings, this high-definition, infinitely complex, epic poem just projects into the air.
It really is like discovering Homer's Iliad or Odyssey, but with far more profound theology.
And unexcelled metaphors, too, like the author comparing the brevity of human life to a weaver's shuttle or a passing shadow or a runner sprinting toward the finish line.
And the reason this immense antiquity matters for anyone listening today is that it completely establishes the universality of human suffering and our quest for meaning.
How so? Because it's before Israel existed.
Yes, by placing the story completely outside the Abrahamic covenant line, meaning God's interactions here aren't restricted just to the nation of Israel, the text becomes universal. It's a story about a Gentile in a foreign land.
So it's meant for any suffering believer in any age.
Precisely. It strips away all the religious architecture, the temples, the organized theology, and just leaves a raw, vulnerable human being standing before his creator, demanding to know why the universe is so painful.
But Job's earthly devastation makes absolutely no sense until you pull back the curtain on the cosmic realm. Because, this whole thing didn't start in the dirt of Uz. It started in a hidden heavenly throne room that Job didn't even know existed.
This is a crucial structural point for the listener to remember.
Yeah.
We, as the readers, are given omniscient insight into the prologue, but Job remains completely in the dark.
He never knows about the cosmic wager that initiates his suffering. Not once.
No, he doesn't.
So let's look at the setup. We are introduced to Job, and he is described as the greatest of all the men of the East. He's incredibly wealthy, but he's also perfect and upright, meaning he is a man of immense moral integrity.
And he's a deeply dedicated father.
Yeah, his 10 children are constantly throwing feasts, and the morning after these parties, Job gets up early to offer burnt offerings for each of them.
Because his reasoning is, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. He is incredibly spiritually vigilant.
Which is pretty rare for someone with that much money.
It is. He recognizes a profound psychological truth. The greatest spiritual danger often comes when things are going incredibly well.
Right, prosperity can breed this silent, subtle independence from God.
Exactly, and Job is actively fighting against the complacency that usually accompanies extreme wealth.
But then the scene abruptly shifts. We are suddenly in a heavenly council. The sons of God, which the historical context identifies as angelic beings, present themselves before the Lord.
And Satan, which in the original Hebrew is Ha-Satan, translating to the adversary or the prosecuting attorney, comes among them.
And God initiates the conversation. He points down at the earth and says to the adversary, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man."
Notice the dynamic there. Satan doesn't bring Job up to attack him.
Yeah, God volunteers him.
God proudly endorses Job's righteousness, offering him up as the ultimate example of human faithfulness. But Satan counters with a deeply cynical but brilliant psychological premise.
He asks one simple question. Does Job fear God for nothing?
Satan is essentially acting as a prosecuting attorney, pointing out a massive conflict of interest.
He says, of course he worships you. You pay him incredibly well. You've put a massive hedge of protection around his life, his family, and his business.
Right, he's arguing that Job's worship isn't genuine love, it's just a transaction.
He's just a smart businessman doing deals with the Almighty. Satan says basically, take away his stuff, smash his assets, and he will curse you to your face.
And that accusation is an attack on the very nature of God himself.
How do you mean?
Satan is claiming that God isn't inherently worthy of worship, and that human beings are completely incapable of genuine, disinterested love for their creator.
Oh, wow. So if Satan is right, then true faith simply doesn't exist.
Exactly. It's all just a spiritual economy of self-interest, a cosmic bribe.
So God permits Satan to test this premise. He removes the hedge of protection, giving Satan power over all that Job possesses, but with one strict boundary: do not touch the man himself.
And what follows is an absolute masterclass in psychological and emotional devastation.
Yeah, in a single afternoon, messenger after messenger arrives at Job's estate with cascading reports of total ruin.
The sheer velocity of the attacks is completely intentional. It is designed to overwhelm Job's sanity before he even has time to process the first loss.
You can just picture Job sitting on his porch. The first messenger runs up, gasping for air, saying, "Sabian nomads attacked the oxen and the donkeys, stole all of them, and slaughtered your servants with the sword. I am the only one who escaped."
And while that guy is still speaking.
Right, while he's still talking, a second messenger runs up, the fire of God. Some massive, unnatural lightning storm fell from heaven and burned up all 7,000 sheep and the shepherds.
And while he's still speaking, a third arrives. 3 bands of Chaldean raiding parties swooped in, stole the 3,000 camels, and killed those servants.
Job has just lost his entire corporate empire in like 3 minutes.
But then, the final crushing blow.
Yeah. A fourth messenger arrives. A great wind from the wilderness struck the 4 corners of his eldest son's house, collapsing the roof. All 10 of Job's children are dead.
He loses his entire fortune, his livelihood, his employees, and every single one of his children in the space of an afternoon.
The emotional whiplash is just beyond human comprehension.
It is, and Job's response defies all natural logic.
He tears his robe, shaves his head, which is the traditional ancient mourning ritual, falls to the ground, and worships.
He says, "Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord."
And the text explicitly notes that in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong.
In that single moment of agonizing worship, Job passes the ultimate test. He proves that a human being can love God for who he is, not just for the material benefits he provides.
So Satan's cynical philosophy about humanity is entirely defeated right there in the dust.
It is. But the adversary doesn't quit.
Of course not. There's a second heavenly council. Satan demands a change to the rules of engagement. He says, "Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face."
Satan is arguing that Job is just relieved he survived the collapse of his empire. Bring the pain directly into his own central nervous system, and his faith will snap.
So God again permits the test, but again sets a rigid, uncrossable limit. Satan must spare Job's life.
And Satan immediately strikes Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head.
Chuck Missler's medical analysis of the text suggests this could have been a form of elephantiasis, or like a horrific combination of chronic eczema and ulcerous festering sores.
Job is in absolute agony, sitting in the ashes of the city dump, scraping his blackened, peeling skin with a broken piece of pottery just to get some relief.
He describes having foul breath, terrifying nightmares, and literal worms breeding in his sores. It is a living horror show.
And it's at this absolute subterranean rock bottom that his own wife approaches him.
Yeah, and we have to view her with some deep compassion here.
Absolutely. She has also just lost her 10 children and her entire luxurious life. She's likely traumatized and completely broken.
She looks at her unrecognizable husband in the dump and says, "Do you still retain your integrity?" curse God and die.
And Job's response to her is staggering. He tells her she is speaking like a foolish woman. He says, "Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" He completely refuses to sin with his lips.
Okay, now let's unpack this for a second because I have to push back hard on this entire setup.
Sure.
Isn't it deeply unsettling that God seems to be using Job as, like, a poker chip in a cosmic bet with the devil? It feels like the game is incredibly rigged against Job from the start. He's suffering unspeakable, mind-bending tragedy just so God can win an argument with Satan.
That feeling of moral outrage you're experiencing is exactly what the text wants you to wrestle with. It is meant to be deeply uncomfortable.
Well, it succeeds.
It does. But we have to look very closely at the power dynamics in that heavenly throne room. God isn't gambling because a gamble implies an unknown outcome. God challenges Satan because God already knows the depth of Job's character.
Okay, but still.
What this prologue reveals is a crucial truth about the architecture of evil. Satan is strictly limited by God's rules. He is a rebel, yes, but he is a rebel on a very short leash. He can do absolutely nothing without divine permission.
Which is why he has to keep coming back to the council to ask for a change in the rules of engagement. He can't just act unilaterally.
Precisely. The larger purpose here isn't a petty divine bet. It is a cosmic vindication of faith before all the principalities and powers of the unseen universe.
To prove a point to the spiritual realm.
Yes. God is using a fragile human being to prove to the entire spiritual realm that genuine faith is real. That you can love God when the spreadsheet is completely broken. That you can worship him when the hedge of protection is removed and replaced with absolute terror.
So Job's unshakable faith actually silences the accuser of humanity. Wow. That totally shifts the perspective. It elevates Job from being a helpless victim of circumstance to being like a cosmic champion. He's fighting a battle for the dignity of the human soul, even though he has no idea he's in the ring.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
But having failed to break Job by destroying his wealth, his family, and his physical health, Satan unleashes what turns out to be his most effective weapon yet.
Yes. And it's not another natural disaster or a raiding party.
Nope. It is Job's well-meaning, deeply religious friends.
This is where the story shifts from physical suffering into intense psychological and spiritual torture.
So we are introduced to three men, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Namathite. They hear of Job's devastating tragedy, they make an appointment with each other, and they travel to comfort him.
And when they see him from afar, sitting in the city dump, he is so disfigured by the disease, they don't even recognize their own friend.
They weep, they tear their robes, they throw dust in the air, and then they sit down on the ground with him in complete silence for 7 days and 7 nights.
The 7 days of silence is known in Jewish tradition as sitting Shiva, the statutory mourning period for the dead. They're essentially holding a funeral for a man who is still breathing.
And honestly, looking at the rest of the book, their profound silence was the absolute best comfort they provided.
By far. Because the moment they open their mouths, the entire situation becomes incredibly toxic.
Yeah. After 7 days of agonizing, suffocating silence, the internal pressure finally cracks Job. Chapter 3 is just an explosion of raw grief. He curses the day he was born.
He asks 3 haunting, poetic questions. Why was I born? Why didn't I die at birth, and why can't I die right now?
It's vital to note here, though, that despite his overwhelming despair, Job never contemplates suicide, right?
No, never. In his worldview, life and death are strictly God's domain. But his anguish is so profound that the grave actually looks like a sweet relief, a place where, as he puts it, the wicked cease from troubling and the weary be at rest.
He is thoroughly devastated, physically and emotionally, and this is where his 3 friends step in to quote-unquote help.
Right. And the commentary notes break down their arguments into 3 distinct cycles of speeches, taking up 27 chapters of the book.
We really need to look at the psychology and personalities of these 3 guys because we all know people exactly like this today. First up is Eliphaz. The notes call him Eliphaz the Eloquent. He acts as the mystic moralist. He relies heavily on observation and personal experience.
And Eliphaz starts off relatively politely, almost patronizingly, but his core argument sets the disastrous tone for everything that follows.
What's his argument?
He says, essentially, Job, think about it. Whoever perished being innocent, you reap what you sow.
Huh?
If you are suffering this badly, you planted some very bad seeds.
Oh, man. And then Eliphaz pulls out this incredibly spooky appeal to authority to shut Job down. He describes this terrifying night vision where a spirit passed before his face, making the hair on his flesh stand up, and the spirit whispered to him that mortal man cannot be more just than God.
which is highly manipulative.
He's weaponizing this supposed supernatural encounter to validate his terrible theology and tell Job to stop complaining.
He's saying, God spoke to me in a dream, so you can't argue with my assessment of your life.
So toxic. Then we move to Bildad. Bildad the Brutal. He is the ultimate legalist of the group. He relies entirely on tradition.
He tells Job to inquire of bygone ages and look at what the ancestors said. He's incredibly blunt and cruel, flatly stating that if Job's children were crushed by a collapsing house, it was because they sinned and God simply cast them away for their transgression.
I mean, if you've ever gone through a profound tragedy, you've probably had a Bildad sitting in your living room offering you a bumper sticker theology that completely invalidates your pain. Imagine saying that to a grieving father who just buried 10 kids.
It's unthinkable. And finally, there's Zophar the Zealous. He acts as the dogmatist, the bigot. He relies entirely on rigid assumptions.
And he's maybe the worst one. Zophar actually looks at Job, covered in rotting flesh, and tells him that God is exacting less punishment from Job than his secret iniquity actually deserves.
All three of these men are approaching Job from different angles. Eliphaz from mystical observation, Bildad from rigid tradition, and Zophar from dogmatic assumption. But they all share one fatal, underlying psychological flaw.
Which is strict retribution theology.
Yeah.
That is the spreadsheet we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly that. It is the deeply ingrained human belief that if you are suffering, you must have sinned. It is an airtight, closed-loop system of karma.
Their logic dictates that because God is just, prosperity equals righteousness. Therefore, tragedy must equal hidden sin.
And because Job's suffering is immense, astronomical, his secret sin must be equally astronomical.
It's like they are ancient versions of modern-day prosperity gospel preachers, or, those call-in radio hosts who walk around with a theological revolver in their pocket, ready to shoot partial truths in incredibly complex pain.
That's a very accurate comparison. They have their doctrine perfectly memorized, the math makes sense in their heads, but they have zero actual compassion for the human being bleeding in front of them.
So what's the danger there?
The danger of what the friends are doing is applying general principles to specific mysteries.
Okay.
The book of Proverbs teaches that generally you reap what you sow. If you act foolishly, your life will likely fall apart. But Job demonstrates that this is not an absolute, mechanical, unbreakable law of the universe.
The friends take a partial truth and wield it like a blunt weapon to protect their own worldview.
Exactly. And notice, too, a glaring omission in their behavior over these 27 chapters. They talk endlessly about God, using cold, analytic logic to defend God's honor, but they never once pause to pray for Job.
That is a staggering observation. They just sit there and lecture a dying man.
Their theology is utterly rigid and incomplete. They have no concept of God's grace, no understanding of mercy, and absolutely no category in their minds for the idea that suffering could be a test or a mechanism for refinement rather than a punitive judgment from an angry deity.
They're desperately defending their theological system because if Job is innocent and suffering, it means they are vulnerable to random tragedy too.
Spun on. They are protecting themselves, not comforting their friend.
And as these 3 cycles of speeches grind on, the friends just get more and more toxic. When Job refuses to confess the sins he didn't commit, Eliphaz eventually just sinks to inventing atrocities.
He accuses Job of stripping the naked, withholding water from the weary, and turning away widows empty-handed.
So Job realizes these guys are completely useless to him. Their comfort is actually a psychological trap designed to make him admit to a lie.
So he turns away from them. He turns his face away from the earth, and he cries out for something entirely unprecedented in human history.
Which brings us to Job's evolving faith and his realization of the massive, terrifying chasm between himself and God.
This is where the theological depth of the book reaches a staggering peak. Job is fiercely defending his integrity. He knows he isn't flawless. He's not claiming sinless perfection here, but he knows with absolute, unshakable certainty that he hasn't committed any secret atrocities that warrant this specific, targeted devastation.
The punishment simply does not fit the crime.
But the more he argues his case to the sky, the more he realizes the terrifying reality of his situation. He's a frail mortal man covered in worms and boils, sitting in dirt. How can he possibly take the creator of the cosmos to court?
He says in chapter 9, "He is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment." He recognizes this vast, uncrossable chasm between the absolute holiness of an infinite God and the frailty of a finite human being.
And out of that terrifying realization comes one of the most desperate and profound cries in all of ancient literature.
What does he ask for?
Job realizes he cannot argue his case directly. He would be vaporized by God's holiness. He needs a go-between. He cries out, "Neither is there any daysman betwixt us that might lay his hand upon us both." A daysman is an arbiter, an umpire. He is demanding a mediator.
He's asking for someone who can stand in the gap, someone who is equal with God and understands the absolute holiness of heaven, but can also put an arm around a broken, suffering human and bring them together on equal footing.
It's a massive theological leap of faith for a man living in 2000 BC.
And it culminates in chapter 19, verses 25 through 27, which the commentary notes identify as one of the clearest and earliest declarations of a living mediator in the entire Old Testament.
The imagery is incredible. Even as his physical skin is rotting off his body, Job stares into the future and declares, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God."
I know that my Redeemer lives. He is prophesying a living mediator and a bodily resurrection centuries before the rest of the biblical canon catches up to the idea.
Job's faith is like a hothouse plant. Before this trial, it looked beautiful and lush, but it had only ever known a perfectly controlled climate.
So God didn't bulldoze it. He took it out of the greenhouse and put it in Category 5 hurricane to see if the roots would actually hold in the wild.
And the roots hold. Job declares his ultimate trust.
But I have to ask, why does God let Job twist in the wind for so long? I mean, Job makes this incredible leap of faith. He's begging for an umpire. God knows Job is innocent. God initiated the whole wager. Why not just drop a note from heaven at this point?
Like a cosmic memo.
Yeah. Like, "Hey, Job, it's a cosmic bet with Satan. You're doing great. Hang in there." Why the endless, agonizing silence?
If God simply handed Job a cosmic memo explaining the wager, it would alleviate Job's curiosity, but it wouldn't transform his soul.
How so?
God is doing something far deeper than merely providing information. Information alone doesn't heal the human heart. God is translating abstract theology into raw, agonizing, deeply personal experience.
How does the silence accomplish that?
Before the trial, Job knew God primarily by observation, by tradition, and through the lens of his blessings. But by stripping away all of Job's earthly comforts, his wealth, his family, and even his health, God is forcing Job to discover if the friendship of God is truly enough to sustain a human soul.
Is God himself the reward, or are God's blessings the reward?
Exactly. Job is being forged in a furnace. And in this way, Job serves as a profound type of Christ.
Break that connection down for me. How does Job point forward?
Job is the ultimate innocent sufferer of the Old Testament. He is suffering not for his own personal sins, but as part of a much larger cosmic purpose to defeat the accuser.
Right.
He is completely misunderstood, abandoned, and falsely accused by his closest friends. And in the midst of his agony, he longs for a mediator to bridge the gap between heaven and earth.
And this longing, this agonizing cry for an umpire who can lay his hand on both God and man is ultimately definitively fulfilled in the New Testament with Jesus Christ.
The Word made flesh, the ultimate daysman who suffers innocently to silence the adversary forever. Job's suffering points directly to the cross.
That puts the suffering in a completely different light. It's not just random pain, it's intense preparation for a massive revelation.
Yes, it is.
But before God actually shows up to provide that revelation, the dialogue between Job and his friends just exhausts itself. They just start talking in circles.
And right as the debate grinds to a halt, a mysterious fourth voice steps out of the shadows.
We meet a character named Elihu.
Yes, Elihu.
Elihu is this young bystander who has apparently been sitting there silently listening to this agonizing theological debate for days, maybe even weeks. And the text says he's absolutely furious.
He has a dual anger. First, he's angry at the three older friends because they condemn Job as a wicked sinner without actually providing a real answer or proving his guilt.
And second, he's angry at Job because Job spent all his breath justifying himself, insisting on his own righteousness, rather than justifying God.
Elihu is a fascinating and often misunderstood figure. Some commentators quickly dismiss him as just an arrogant, hot-headed youth speaking out of turn. But our deep study notes strongly suggest he plays a vital prophetic role in the narrative.
He introduces a massive paradigm shift that finally breaks the theological deadlock between Job and the three friends, right?
Yes. The three friends argued that pain is strictly for punishing the wicked, a paddle for bad behavior.
But Elihu steps up and says, no, God doesn't just use pain to punish. He uses pain as a megaphone to teach, to warn, to correct, and to refine the righteous.
It's an act of preventative love. not just reactive wrath. Pain can keep a man from falling into the pit.
And Elihu points out a very subtle but dangerous flaw that has crept into Job's heart during the long weeks of suffering. Job has started viewing God as capricious, unfair, and operating like a moody human being. Job actually said, "It profits a man nothing that he should delight himself with God."
And Elihu rightly and firmly rebukes that statement. He defends God's absolute justice and inscrutable sovereignty, but he does it very differently than the three friends did.
What does he do differently?
He says to Job, "I'm according to thy wish in God's stead. I also am formed out of the clay."
It's like Elihu is actively playing the role of the very mediator Job asked for. He's saying, "I'm not God. I'm made of dirt just like you, but I'm here to stand in the gap and speak truth to you."
It's a profound moment of human mediation.
I view Elihu like an Old Testament version of John the Baptist. He's the warm-up act. He's the guy who comes out to clear the theological debris off the stage, demanding that both the friends and Job drop their pride and self-righteousness, preparing the way for the main event.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy, and here is a critical piece of textual evidence to support that view of Elihu. At the very end of the book, when God finally shows up and passes judgment on all the speakers, God fiercely rebukes Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. But he never rebukes Elihu.
Not a single word of correction for the young guy. God doesn't say, "Who is this kid talking out of turn?"
Exactly. Elihu spoke truthfully. He acted as a human mediator, speaking with both theological conviction and deep human compassion, actively preparing Job's heart for the overwhelming reality of what is about to happen.
And what happens next is incredibly cinematic.
Oh.
Elihu is finishing his final speech, and he starts describing an approaching, terrifying electrical storm.
He's literally pointing at the sky, describing the lightning and the roaring thunder, saying, "God thundereth marvelously with his voice."
And out of that very physical, violent whirlwind, the 37 chapters of heaven's agonizing silence are finally broken.
We arrive at the climax of the epic.
God speaks to Job directly out of the storm. But here's the crazy part. Job has been sitting there in agony, begging for a trial, demanding an indictment, wanting to know why this is happening to him.
And God doesn't give him a single explanation about the cosmic wager.
He doesn't mention Satan. He doesn't explain the suffering. Instead, God unleashes 77 unanswerable questions about the physical universe. I like to call it God's science quiz.
This is a stunning, brilliant rhetorical strategy. God answers Job's demand for a legal trial, not with a court document, but with an overwhelming, majestic display of cosmic architecture.
The quiz is intense. God starts right out of the gate with, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Declare if you have understanding."
He grills Job on his knowledge of astrophysics, asking if Job can bind the chains of the Pleiades star cluster or loose the cords of Orion.
He asks about the meteorological cycle, the springs of the sea, the exact weight of the wind.
And our notes highlight that there are incredible scientific anticipations hidden in this ancient poetry.
Like what?
Well, mentioning that the wind has literal weight, or describing the complex hydrological cycle of evaporation and precipitation, those were concepts entirely unknown to ancient science at the time, yet they are perfectly described here in this 4,000-year-old text.
That's fascinating. And then God moves from the cosmos to zoology. He asks Job if he gives the horse its might or if the hawk flies by Job's wisdom. He points to the wild donkey, the ostrich.
But then God spends 2 whole chapters focusing intensely on 2 massive, terrifying, untamable creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan.
These descriptions are incredibly detailed. Behemoth is described as a massive land creature that eats grass like an ox, but has a tail like a massive cedar tree and bones like tubes of bronze.
And Leviathan is an aquatic nightmare, a terrifying sea creature with impenetrable armored scales that breathes fire and smoke and treats iron weapons like brittle straw.
A fire-breathing sea monster. That sounds like Godzilla. Our notes suggest these could be poetic, exaggerated descriptions of hippos and crocodiles, or possibly even extinct dinosaur-like creatures that ancient humans had a collective terrifying memory of.
But whatever they literally were in the physical world, they are utterly terrifying.
But I have to ask the obvious question. What does this all mean for Job? I mean, Job is sitting on an ash heap, scraping bleeding boils with broken pottery, grieving his 10 dead children, and God shows up in a tornado to give him a pop quiz about astrophysics and dinosaur-like monsters.
It sounds a bit disjointed, doesn't it?
Isn't that just deeply insensitive? It feels like God is just flexing his cosmic muscles to bully a broken man into submission.
It can certainly read that way if we miss the underlying logic of what God is doing. But this raises a vital question about moral governance.
Walk me through that. How do monsters relate to Job's pain?
Job had essentially been arguing for chapters that God was mismanaging the moral universe by allowing an innocent man to suffer so deeply. By taking Job on this whirlwind tour of the physical universe, God is showing him the intricate, delicate, incomprehensible balance required to sustain physical creation.
And then God points specifically to Leviathan.
Right. In ancient Near Eastern literature, the sea was always a symbol of chaos, and sea monsters were the ultimate embodiment of that chaos.
So Leviathan isn't just a big animal here.
No, the text explicitly calls him the king over all the sons of pride. He is a physical symbol of deeply entrenched cosmic evil and untamable chaos.
So God is essentially asking Job, look at this terrifying beast. Can you put a leash on him? Can you make him your servant? Can you negotiate with chaos?
And Job obviously cannot. So God's underlying point is, Job, if you cannot even comprehend the physical foundations of the earth, and you are utterly powerless to tame the physical manifestations of chaos and pride, how can you possibly presume to have the wisdom, the perspective, or the power to run the moral universe?
Oh, wow. That hits hard.
It completely shatters Job's subtle assumption that if he were in charge, he could do a better job than God. It reveals that dealing with evil, taming the ultimate leviathan of cosmic rebellion, is a task so infinitely complex and perilous that only an all-knowing God can manage it.
That makes the science quiz deeply, intimately relevant to Job's pain. It's not a distraction at all. It's a massive recalibration of his perspective.
Yes, confronted with the overwhelming majesty of the Creator and the terrifying reality of cosmic pride, Job realizes his own profound smallness.
And that realization brings us to the beautiful resolution of the book, the restoration and the final enduring lessons.
Job's immediate response to God's whirlwind speech is incredibly beautiful and humbling. He doesn't sulk, he doesn't argue back, he repents completely.
He says, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes.
That is the ultimate turning point of the epic. The inner eye of Job's heart finally sees the true nature of God. The subtle self-righteousness, the demand for a spreadsheet explanation, the underlying pride, it all melts away in the terrifying but beautiful presence of the Almighty.
Job realizes that having God's presence is infinitely better than having all his questions answered.
And then God turns his attention to the three friends who have been sitting there terrified.
Oh, I bet they were. God rebukes Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, telling them, My wrath is kindled against thee, for you have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath.
God demands that they offer 7 bulls and 7 rams as a burnt offering. But there's a massive, incredibly difficult catch.
God tells them they have to go to Job, and Job must pray for them. God says he will only accept Job's prayer on their behalf.
This is a stunning reversal of fortunes. The deeply religious men who came to judge and condemn Job are now entirely dependent on his intercession for their own forgiveness.
And the timing of the restoration here is absolutely critical to the whole message of the book. The text says, And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends.
It wasn't when he repented.
No, it was only after he extended grace, forgiveness, and intercession to the very men who had emotionally tormented him with bad theology for weeks that God restored his fortunes.
And God gives him double what he lost. 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen. He is blessed with 10 more children, and he lives another 140 years to see 4 generations of his descendants.
It's a profound picture of grace. Job is required to forgive, just as he has been forgiven.
God couldn't just give Job his stuff back right away. The trial had to do its full work.
It's like a complete teardown and rebuild of a house. You can't just paint over a cracking foundation of self-sufficiency. God had to bulldoze Job's pride so he could build true, unshakable faith. A faith that relies on God alone, not on the blessings, not on the hedge of protection, and definitely not on the spreadsheet.
The ultimate lesson of Job isn't just a moral fable about having patience during hard times. It is the total, unapologetic destruction of human self-righteousness.
It teaches us that suffering in the life of a believer often has deep cosmic purposes that we cannot decode.
And frankly, shouldn't presume to understand. True worship is loving God for who he is, not for the transactional blessings he provides.
Job learns to surrender, to say, effectively, not my will, but yours be done.
And in doing so, he beautifully foreshadows Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, who embraced the ultimate, unjust suffering to completely defeat the ultimate Leviathan of evil.
Which brings us right back to you, the listener, because the reality is you will inevitably face seasons of unexplained suffering. You will encounter the terrifying, confusing silence of heaven.
And you will very likely have well-meaning friends who sit in your living room and offer you terrible, painful advice wrapped in neat religious language.
The Book of Job is a timeless invitation to stop demanding a cosmic spreadsheet of explanations. It is an invitation to trust the absolute character, the unsearchable wisdom, and the sovereign love of the Creator, even when you are standing in the darkest part of the whirlwind.
And we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on today, something that builds right out of the text.
Think about Satan's original, deeply cynical premise in that heavenly throne room. The idea that humans only serve God for the transactional benefits and the material blessings they get in return.
If that is the accuser's core argument, could our modern obsession with finding our life's purpose, our demand for constant personal fulfillment, and our tendency to treat spirituality as just another self-help tool to get ahead in life, could all of that actually be playing right into the accuser's hands?
Are we truly worshiping the Creator of the universe, or are we just worshiping the hedge of protection he provides? Think about that.
Thank you for joining us on this in-depth look into the Book of Job. Next week, on the Story Behind Scripture, Books of the Bible series, we open up the Book of Psalms.
If you'd like to read more about the stories behind Scripture, try Written in Fire, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of the destruction of Solomon's temple, told through the pages of the Bible and the voices of the prophets. The fire that destroyed the city and the temple did not end in ashes, but in a Messiah. Pick up Written in Fire on